I would like to apologize for my poor, or rather poorer, mic quality. As I am home for spring break, I did not expect to be on any streams or panels or whatever. I did not bring my microphone. I did not bother to set up the room I'm in a way that would be effective or congruent for video making. And yet I felt compelled to comment on the most recent development in regards to Helldivers 2. Now, for everyone who is fully engrossed within this game, I do not need to elaborate. But for those of you who are not, or who merely touch the water, dip your toe in. Let me go into greater depth as to what I mean. So, Arrowhead Studios has had sort of a boom-bust relation with the player base. The boom started with the release of the game and it being amazing. The bust being several nerfs. The boom being, hey, we cut that out. The bust being Sony, and on and on and on it went, until we've hit a very recent bust, wherein the developers, or rather the CEO specifically, I'm not going to put words in anyone's mouth, but the CEO outright said that the plan for creating Helldivers was to showcase how easy it is to trick people into falling for totalitarian, fascistic propaganda. And that, well, that's basically it. That they created the game to force the players, or not even force the players, to give them the option to become totalitarian and to recognize the trap of totalitarianism and of fascism. I would like to establish that the CEO, in the interview he gave, never once defined totalitarianism or fascism. Most leftists, whenever they use those big, scary words, never define it, or they point to Umberto Eco in his essay, which if you actually look at the tenets of fascism that he lists, and says that if you have any one of those, you are a fascistic state, defines the Native Americans as fascist. And maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just because I've read stuff like Custer's journals, or, you know, I'm blanking on the name, but it's a book about the Cheyenne Indians, the Cheyenne natives. Not Life on the Prairie, that's the Custer books. I will have a picture of the book on screen when I do editing for this. I've read those books. I've read how Native American society works. And the nature of being xenophobic, as described by Umberto Eco as a tenet of fascism, and the fact that the Native Americans were, by all definitions, incredibly xenophobic, would make them fascistic under the Umberto Eco paradigm. So I completely reject any leftist definitions of fascism, any leftist definitions of totalitarianism, because they fail to define these things. I will be defining these things, so you can understand the argument I am making as I go forward. To start with totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is an ideology which demands you adhere total loyalty to the state in all ways. Now, the state in question, it could be a monarchy, it could be a democracy, it could be a dictatorship, it could be whatever. But if it is a system that demands you in your private and public life swear loyalty to the state, that is a totalitarian state. Can this describe Super Earth? I would say no. I would absolutely say no. Because the player is given the free choice to speak however they want in comms, and to execute their fellow players and they're also able to engage in activities that are not sanctioned by Super Earth, including friendly fire or completely ignoring primary objectives. Are there democracy officers? Absolutely. But my counter to that is this is a military institution, and you will be hearing that argument made a lot. Of course, there is going to be an internal affairs bureau. Every police department, every firefighter department, every military is going to have an internal investigation board to determine whether or not its operatives are of sound mind, of sound capability, and of loyalty to a sufficient degree of which to be an effective combatant for the purposes of the state. Pretty much every accusation of fascism levied at Helldivers is going to fall under it's a military state, or not a military state. It is a military organization that you are within as a Helldiver. You dumbass. Now to define fascism. Fascism is one of those things where a lot of people have their own definitions, and there's no real hard, clear one, because so many people have attempted to define it and so many people have misused it that it has become a nebulous, you're my political opposition, ergo Nazi, or fascist in this instance. I'm going to take a crack at it. I view fascism, and this is my personal definition, so if you disagree, feel free to leave that in the description down below, or description in the comments down below, but my definition of fascism is it is a both stricter but also looser application of socialism, in the effect that you are allowed to have your own personal property, you are allowed to pursue your own personal profit, and you are allowed to pursue your own whims within the society, but ultimately you must swear loyalty to the state. The state is what begets legitimacy under fascism. Not the leader, not the people, the state apparatus itself, under the fascist paradigm. For instance, you had private companies in Italy or under Nazi Germany, and there was never any goal to remove these. Even under, if I'm remembering certain quotes from Sir Oswald Mosley, for instance, there was never any attempt of nationalizing the industries. There was merely an emphasis on, and again, feel free to correct me if I'm misquoting or misremembering things, there was an emphasis on maintaining the Britishness of Britain, of keeping the strength of the British economy. There was never any call for state ownership of the entire economy. There was a demand for loyalty, and if a government employee walked into your establishment, you were expected to adhere to what he demanded of you, and you were expected to swear loyalty to the state, and you were expected to not deviate from the groupthink. But unlike socialism, which determined what you would be able to receive from the state in the form of resources, luxury, and how your day-to-day was managed, under a fascistic paradigm, you have the same demand of loyalty, but you have the freedom of how to pursue that loyalty, if that makes any sense. So, let's look at Helldivers. What can we say about the Society of Helldivers that would make us think it is fascistic? Nothing. We have no idea how the average citizen in Helldivers lives their lives. We understand that it is a democracy because voting is a factor. We understand that it has incredible universal citizen franchise. Even at the age of 16, you can be a citizen based off the description of the Constitution rifle. We also know that there is private industry, and I'm blanking on the name currently, but again, feel free to correct me in the comments down below, the Helghast army that we received in lore comes from a third-party weapons manufacturer who donated it, or it was purchased to, again, details are shaky in memory, who donated them to the Helldivers, or we were purchased by Super Earth from the Helldivers. A third-party entity. You would not have that necessarily under a fascistic society. Now, if it's a case of it falls under the purview of Super Earth as a whole, then okay, but that then begs the question, why weren't they available beforehand? It wasn't a case of, oh, these are recently developed equipment. It was a case of this company, due to our current shortages, is providing us with new munitions, new armor, new weaponry. So this must have been an outside entity because of that. Yet we can also determine that Super Earth is incredibly controlling of your existence, as there are, and this is for citizens, not just Helldivers, the necessity of signing I believe it was a CO1 form for the purposes of sex. Not to conceive a child, but to engage in sex. You must fill out a form and submit it and receive permission to do so. Okay, I would argue from that paradigm that there is a level of totalitarianism at play because the state is entering into your life and attempting to control elements of your life. However, I would argue that that is not necessarily something that many people in the modern day can claim as inherently evil. If you are perfectly fine with the current state of our affairs in America, in Sweden, which is the development source of this game, in Germany, in Britain, in France, I would willingly state that these states are all totalitarian. And my source? If I were to open a business, I would have to adhere to how the state demands that I build the building, how I produce my product, how I pay my workers, the hours I provide my workers, the conditions of which my workers are in, what I charge the customer, how much of the money that I make actually goes to me and how much goes to the state. I am required to open up my books to them. I am required to expose myself to inspections to them. Every aspect of my commercial existence is controlled by the state. That is somehow, not controlled by the state, is observed by and in some instances controlled by the state. That is on some level totalitarian. To what extent? It's absolutely on the looser side of totalitarianism. I don't have a political officer standing in my room holding a gun to my head as I make this video, making sure I don't say anything that is not permitted by the party line, but at the same time, it is not the total freedom of I can do whatever I want. There is still a level of totalitarianism at play. And so when you have a society that is inherently totalitarian going, oh, well, Super Earth is totalitarian because you have to get a form to do something. I need to get a fucking form filled out to drive, to own a gun, to open a business. I have to open up my bank. The government has free access to my bank account to inspect to make sure I'm paying them the right amount of money they want. Through not my legitimacy, I didn't vote for that. The average person didn't vote for that. That was chosen by the state. The modern nation state is inherently totalitarian. So to levy that against Super Earth as a criticism and calling it evil because of that is frankly hypocritical and showing of limited understanding of the terms being used. And that is the biggest argument I have against this whole "you're a helldiver, that makes you fascistic," is the terms being used are not backed up by what actually occurs in real life. It is simply buzzwords being thrown to go, you're bad because you are dressed in a uniform and killing innocent, I say in quotation, aliens. And on the topic of the argument of, well, we wanted to see if players had the choice. So there are no way to pick factions. I could not pick to be a Terminid. I could not pick to be an Automaton. I could not pick to be an Overseer, not an Overseer, an Illuminate. My options were to play as Super Earth. So, if the question is, would people be willing to play a fascistic state, even assuming they got that detail correct, the argument then becomes we wanted to see if people would buy our game. We are a for-profit company. We are seeking to make a profit off a video game that we produced and sought to sell to a consumer base. So for this entire argument to be true, the developers, if they wanted a world where people were good, would have been willing to lay off their workers to prove a point. No, I fundamentally believe that that is not the case. I believe that this is merely pandering in order to respond to what the CEO views as a negative consumer base. Because he's looking at the consumers who jump in and actively enjoy the game and its setting, and because of his own personal biases and fears, believes that this is a sign that the Fourth Reich is coming. It is not. It is people enjoying a video game at best, and people... I mean, at the end of the day, it's enjoying a video game at best. There's what's the worst? That is people standing up and wanting to defend their species from alien invaders? Because make no mistake, if the argument is, oh, well, Super Earth fascist, okay, well, hold on, let's lay out what the opposition are. Bugs that want to eat and kill everything in their path. Bots that want to genocide in the most horrific ways imaginable all of humanity. Illuminate, who are throwing a black hole at Super Earth, a heavily populated civilian planet. I mean, okay. Civilian planet, I'm a adherent to Clausewitz, so that I should not have used that term. A heavily populated planet. There we go. It is a heavily populated planet. All of these enemies are doing the exact same thing that we are doing. They are attempting to pursue the continued existence and self-determination of their species. For us to be evil, they are also evil. Thus, this is a world of moral gray, where what comes down is your own perspective. And if you're a human who believes that humanity has the right to exist, then you are good for pursuing the defense of humanity. Now, some people may quote the first game of, oh, well, in the first game, all of the races were living peacefully and happily before Super Earth came in. I do not know how true that claim is. I've seen that claim on Twitter. I've never seen it backed up, but let's assume that that claim is true, that those races were living peace and happy, and then the Fire Nation attacked. Okay. Let me ask you a question. So 100 years is a long time. Let's go back 100 years. Let's go back to, what is it? It's currently 2020. Let's go back to 1925, okay? The Great Depression hits. There was an individual wearing a brown shirt going around and beating people up for not joining the fascist party. Should his great-grandson be forced to face a wall and have a gun put to the back of his head because of what his great-grandfather did? No. Then by the same token, the current citizens of Super Earth should not be subjected to the sins of their ancestors. And if you believe otherwise, then you are justifying your murder, because at some point in your genetic heritage, your line did something to someone else's lineage, and that gives them the carte blanche to execute you by your own morality that you have displayed. So, I hope I've made a good case as to why Super Earth is not fascistic, why it may be totalitarian, but at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter because we live in a totalitarian society, and why even if all of the accusations levied are true, that within the rhetorical argument of Super Earth, the Helldivers are completely justified. And to end off, again, this is a military entity. Unless we are given a SimCity Super Earth, we will never know the nature of how the average super citizen lives their lives, and thus we will never know if it's actually fascistic, monarchic, democratic, oligarchic, anarchic, whatever the case may be, because we will never see the civilian side of things. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day. See you next time.